In a quiet hospital corridor, Dexter Morgan walks toward Oliver Saxon's room with no knives, no plastic, and no pretense of following Harry's code. Saxon is handcuffed, under police guard, a suspect about to face the justice system Dexter was supposedly trained to respect. Instead, Dexter pulls out a pen and calmly drives it into Saxon's neck while a security camera records everything. No ritual, no code, just an execution in custody. Throughout his life, Dexter claimed Harry's rules kept his urges to kill focused on deserving victims and away from innocent lives. Yet this moment in the hospital exposes a different truth. The Bay Harbor butcher ends his story by murdering a restrained suspect on camera, abandoning the illusion that the code is still in control. This is not a sudden break. This is the final, honest expression of a pattern that began long before Saxon. Let's kick things off with a rapid look at how often Dexter already betrayed Harry's design. In the Everglades cabin, Sergeant James Dokes is chained like one of Dexter's targets, but he does not meet the code. Dokes is innocent of murder, guilty only of discovering the truth about Dexter's life. When Lila burns the cabin and kills Dokes, Dexter lets the frame job stand, turning an innocent man into the Bay Harbor butcher so the real killer can walk free. At the shipping yard, Captain Mara LaGuerta corners Dexter with evidence that connects him to the butcher case. She is not a predator, not a dark passenger's ideal target, but a cop chasing justice. Dexter chooses to kill her anyway, staging the scene to protect himself and Debra. The code's supposed line against harming the innocent dissolves the moment his secret is at risk. Earlier still, Brian Moser lies on Dexter's kill table, a brother who shares the same childhood trauma, the same urges to kill. Brian's crime, in Dexter's eyes, is not that he targets innocents, but that he wants Debra dead and Dexter free of Harry's rules. Killing Brian becomes a choice for the code over blood, but it also reveals how personal loyalty, not objective guilt, shapes Dexter's decisions. Then there is Hannah McKay, a proven serial poisoner. By Harry's standards, she perfectly fits the profile of a justified kill. Instead, Dexter lets her walk free, helps her escape, and even plans a future life with her. Emotion overrides every pillar of the code, showing that love can excuse the same crimes that once defined his victims. Taken together, these moments challenge the myth that Dexter always follows the code. So the central question becomes clear. Did he ever truly live by Harry's rules, or was the code always a story his dark passenger used to feel less monstrous? In this video, we're going to dive deep into every major time Dexter bent, twisted, or shattered his own rules, and trace the long-term effects of each break on his life, his family, and his victims. By the end, the Saxon murder will not look like an outlier, but the inevitable endpoint of an event that changed everything, Harry teaching a boy to believe that a code could ever control a killer. To understand every time Dexter breaks the code of Harry, we first have to be clear on what that code actually is. On the surface, it sounds simple, almost noble, a set of rules that turns a budding killer into a controlled instrument of justice. But once the layers peel back, the truth is far more pragmatic and far more dangerous. Let's kick things off with the core pillars as Harry presents them. First, never get caught. Above all else, the code is about survival. Second, only kill those who deserve it, murderers who have escaped the system. Third, gather absolute proof. Harry drills into Dexter that suspicion is never enough. There must be evidence, a confession, a pattern of victims. Finally, blend into normal life as a cover. Family, work at Miami Metro, barbecues with colleagues, these are not just comforts, they are camouflage. That disillusionment fuses with the horror of discovering Dexter's dark passenger. The code becomes his compromise. Channel the urges, do not cure them, direct them at acceptable victims, and wrap the whole enterprise in rules that look ethical but function as a safety protocol. This would be the start of a lifelong illusion that Dexter is following a moral law, when in reality, the law is built to protect Dexter. This tension between surface morality and underlying pragmatism will drive almost every major violation we're going to dive deep into. On one side, the rule that only killers with proof on record deserve to die. On the other, the unspoken clause If someone threatens Dexter's cover, the code bends. Brian Moser, James Dokes, Maria LaGuerta, even Debra and Oliver Saxon later on, all collide with that hidden agenda and pay the price. For this breakdown, the focus will stay on those major narrative violations, not minor technical slips. We are looking at moments where Dexter's choices clearly contradict either the letter of the code, no proof, wrong target, needless collateral, or the spirit of it, when self-protection outweighs any claim to justice. Each of these breaks carries consequences that ripple through his life, his family, and his victims. From here, the path will be chronological. We will start with Dexter's earliest days under Harry, track the first cracks in the code, and move season by season as emotional attachments, professional pressures, and escalating lies push him further away from Harry's design. By the time we reach that hospital hallway murder, the long-term effects of every compromise will make it clear the code was never strong enough to hold the killer it tried to contain. To understand every time Dexter breaks the code, we first have to question what that code actually is. On the surface, the show presents it as a moral shield, a strict set of rules that separates Dexter from the monsters he hunts. But when we're going to dive deep into how it's described by Dexter versus Harry, a different truth starts to emerge. Throughout his life, Dexter's voiceover treats the code almost like scripture. He talks about it as the reason his kills have meaning, the framework that gives his dark passenger a purpose instead of random slaughter. Only kill those who deserve it. Gather absolute proof. Never get caught. In Dexter's narration, this would be the start of a twisted hero narrative where murder becomes a public service and his urges become a calling rather than a pathology. Harry, on the other hand, never talks about it like that. When the flashbacks let the audience hear Harry directly, the code sounds less like a philosophy and more like damage control. He is a cop who has discovered that his adopted son fantasizes about killing. His rules are practical, almost clinical: channel the urges toward people the system failed, leave no trace, blend into normal life. There is no grand speech about justice, only fear about consequences, and a desperate attempt to contain a danger he cannot cure. That gap between how Dexter narrates the code and how Harry teaches it is crucial. The code gives Dexter language to rationalize compulsion. Instead of admitting he kills because he wants to, he tells himself he kills because he has to, because the world needs him to. Every plastic-wrapped table becomes a courtroom, every victim a conviction that only he can carry out. The psychological comfort is obvious. If the code is noble, then Dexter is not a predator. He is a specialist. But the show plants early hints that Harry does not believe his own experiment is noble. One of the most important is an event that changed Dexter's entire life: Harry walking in on Dexter's first full kill room. Harry sees the blood, the dismembered body, the ritual made real. Shortly after, Harry dies by suicide. The implication is devastating. The man who designed the code finally confronts what it looks like in practice and realizes what he has unleashed. Whatever moral story Dexter builds around those rules, Harry's breaking the code. What are we actually watching? Is he betraying Harry's intention, or just stripping away his own self-flattering interpretation and revealing the survival rule underneath? In the next section, we're going to dive deep into his earliest sanctioned kills and test both versions of the code, starting from the moment Harry first says, "This one deserves it." To test those two versions of the code, we have to go back before the pilot, to the years when Harry is not just enforcing the rules, but inventing them in real time. Throughout his life, Dexter treats Harry's code like scripture. The flashbacks reveal something much more fragile: a desperate experiment built on fear, access to power, and a child already learning how to lie. Let's kick things off with the earliest lessons. We see young Dexter killing neighborhood animals, hiding trophies, and feeling that strange calm when the urges are satisfied. Harry discovers the bodies, realizes this is not a phase, and makes an unthinkable choice. Instead of seeking treatment, he decides to shape the dark passenger. The crime scene ride-alongs follow. Dexter stands in the blood spatter, while Harry walks him through the failures of the justice system, building the narrative that some victims never get justice unless someone like Dexter intervenes. The moment Harry first articulates "only kill killers" is framed as an event that changed Dexter's entire life. In the car, after yet another case collapses, Harry turns to his adopted son and lays out the prototype code: never get caught, only kill those who deserve it, and make sure the evidence is absolute. But the flashbacks make clear this is not a natural moral awakening in Dexter. It is a script handed to him. His early attempts to follow it are clumsy and almost mechanical. We watch young Dexter stalking a potential target, misreading cues, getting too close, and nearly exposing himself. Harry steps in, corrects his posture, his questions, even his facial expressions. Every adjustment underscores how learned and artificial the code really is. Dexter is not discovering a conscience. He is rehearsing a performance designed to keep a killer functional and invisible. At the same time, Harry is already bending legal and ethical lines to feed that performance. He uses his badge, his informants, and confidential case files to help Dexter identify targets. When he drives Dexter past the nurse who is secretly overdosing patients, or brings home details about a child killer who walked on a technicality, Harry is weaponizing police access for off-the-books executions. The rule "only kill killers" is already contaminated by another rule: protect Dexter at all costs. Then comes the real fracture point. Harry walks in on Dexter's first full human kill, sees the plastic, the tools, the ritual. For the first time, Harry does not see a damaged boy he can guide. He sees the dark passenger fully formed. His horror in that moment is the pattern interrupt the series hides in plain sight. This is the architect realizing the building has no fire exits. Harry's suicide soon after is the first major code break, and it is committed by the creator himself. By abandoning Dexter with a half-explained rulebook and a handful of charged memories, Harry ensures Dexter will reinterpret the code to suit survival and self-image. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how those early, supervised kills evolve once Harry is gone, and how every lesson Dexter remembers becomes a justification with lethal consequences. Harry's absence leaves a vacuum, and early Season 1 shows Dexter rushing to fill it with ritual and routine. On the surface, this is the era where the code seems strongest, where Dexter looks most disciplined, and where every kill appears carefully justified. But that apparent control is exactly what makes the later cracks so significant. Let's kick things off with Dexter's double life at the start of the series. By day, he is a blood spatter analyst for Miami Metro, insists that every potential target is researched, background checked, and surveilled. He stalks a child killer at an ice rink, confirms a nurse is overdosing her patients, and digs into a human trafficker's past before making the decision to kill. Again and again, he repeats the mantra that he only kills those who deserve it, framing the code as a moral firewall that separates him from the predators he hunts. At the same time, the code demands camouflage, and that is where Rita enters Dexter's life as a crucial element of his performance. In early episodes, Dexter explicitly treats their relationship as cover, choosing a partner who is traumatized, sexually withdrawn, and unlikely to ask dangerous questions. Dates, family dinners, and interactions with her children function as props in his effort to blend in, rather than as genuine emotional commitments. The long-term effects of this choice will be devastating, but in Season 1, it reads as an almost perfect execution of Harry's rule to appear normal at all costs. Harry's presence remains active as a ghostly advisor in Dexter's mind. We see imagined conversations, flashbacks to lessons in empty lots, and stern reminders about never getting caught. The code is not just an external rulebook, it has become an internalized voice, a running commentary that praises discipline and warns against impulse. This would be the start of Dexter treating his own memory of Harry as evidence that he is still on the right path. Yet even in this controlled phase, the narrative plants early signs that the code is already bending. Dexter's fascination with the ice truck killer is personal, not procedural. He lets evidence go, follows cryptic clues, and allows this unknown rival to dictate the pace of discovery, violating his usual demand for absolute proof before engagement. He even spares a security guard by proxy, setting him up as bait without fully investigating his guilt, which quietly undercuts the idea that every decision is grounded in certainty. Season 1, then, is not just a portrait of a disciplined serial killer, it is an origin point for self-deception. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how the ice truck killer's true identity forces Dexter to choose between Harry's code and his own blood, and how that choice exposes the first undeniable break in the rules he claims to live by. If Harry's code is supposed to be a rigid shield against chaos, the show quietly cracks that shield much earlier than most viewers remember. Before Brian's unmasking, before Deborah is pulled into Dexter's orbit, there is a quiet night at a shipping yard where the code's demand for absolute certainty gets traded for curiosity and control. Let's kick things off with the sequence itself. Dexter arranges a late-night stakeout at the shipping yard, following the ice truck killer's pattern and anticipating his next move. A security guard patrols the containers, bored and unaware that Dexter has already marked this place as a hunting ground. Instead of warning the guard or removing him from danger, Dexter deliberately leaves him in place, effectively positioning a living, breathing human as bait to draw out his rival. Throughout his life, Dexter claims that Harry's code channels his urges and protects innocent life. Yet in this moment, the guard becomes a piece on a chessboard. Dexter does not apply the usual ritual of investigation. No detailed background check, no stalking of past behavior, no painstaking search for victims. He notes some sketchy behavior and a possible criminal record, but the standard of proof drops dramatically because the real target is not the guard at all. It is the ice truck killer, and Dexter's dark passenger wants a closer look. On paper, Dexter can tell himself he is still aligned with the rule to only kill those who deserve it, because he is not the one holding the weapon when the guard dies. In practice, this is a profound violation of the spirit of that promise. The guard's potential innocence becomes expendable, a calculated risk in Dexter's private game. The code says gather absolute proof before a kill. Here, Dexter allows someone else to do the killing based on moral safeguards that Harry tried to build get overridden by a desire to engage, to understand, and ultimately to dominate a rival predator. Harry's choice to create the code was meant to prevent collateral damage, yet this shipping yard moment exposes how easily that protection can be rationalized away. Dexter's decision here is not an event that changed his life overnight, but it plants a seed. If a stranger's life can be risked in service of the hunt, what happens when the rival killer is bound to Dexter by blood, or when the person in danger is someone Harry loved? In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how chasing the ice truck killer's true identity brings that question terrifyingly close to home. Chasing the ice truck killer's identity brings that earlier question home with a knife's edge twist. What happens when the rival killer is not only bound to Dexter by blood, but also passes the code on paper? Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, is not some chaotic predator. He is meticulous. He dismembers bodies, drains blood, lays out trophies. He targets violent offenders and sex workers who have already been brutalized by other men. On the surface, Brian's victims look a lot like Dexter's. Let's kick things off with how that revelation lands. Brian is exposed as Dexter's older biological brother, the other child in the shipping container who watched their mother Laura Moser get butchered. Unlike Dexter, Brian never received Harry's guidance, but his killing urges developed in parallel. He studies Dexter's kill rooms, mirrors the plastic, the precision, the ritual. In a twisted way, Brian has independently reverse-engineered the code, only kill killers, leave no trace, revel in the truth of what they are. Throughout his life, Dexter believed the code separated him from monsters like the ice truck killer. Brian's reveal shatters that illusion. Here is a killer who deserves to die by the rules, yet also technically fits them as a practitioner. The real fracture comes when Brian decides that sharing a dark passenger is not enough. He wants Dexter fully in his world. To do that, Dexter Morgan has to go. Brian's abduction of Deb is an event that changed Dexter's life because it weaponizes family against family. In the freezer, Deb is strapped to the table, wrapped in plastic, the same position as Dexter's usual victims. Brian literally offers Dexter a choice: kill Deb and embrace blood ties, or reject his biological brother and the freedom of life without rules. The code says, only kill killers. Deb is innocent, but the scene is less about moral clarity and more about exposure. If Deb lives and remembers, Dexter's mask is gone forever. When Dexter ultimately kills Brian, the decision is not driven by outrage at Brian's crimes. Brian already meets the only kill killer's requirement. Instead, Dexter kills to preserve his cover and the carefully curated normal life Harry taught him to perform. Brian is a living contradiction, a brother who understands him completely, yet threatens to blow apart the suburban camouflage, the job, the relationship with Deb. The code's pillar of never get caught silently overrules any brotherly loyalty. Dexter's staging of Brian's death as a suicide is where the hypocrisy becomes undeniable. He cuts Brian's wrist in the bathtub, arranges the scene, and rewrites the narrative for Miami Metro. The blood analyst manufactures evidence. The careful killer manipulates the investigation from the inside. Protecting himself now means corrupting the very crime scenes he claims to respect. This would be the start of a new pattern. Whenever the code's morality clashes with Dexter's survival, survival wins. Brian is not eliminated because he fails the rulebook, but because he knows too much and loves Dexter in a way that threatens the mask. The long-term effects of this choice will echo through Deb's trauma and every later cover-up. And if a brother who shares Dexter's and more a variable that had to be removed so the equation of his double life would still work. Throughout his life, Dexter has used the code as a way to separate his urges from his conscience. Now, after Brian's death, that separation gets even more fragile. Dexter tells himself Brian had to die not only because he threatened Deb, but because Brian represented a path away from Harry's rules. A path toward open, unmasked killing. By casting the murder as a defense of the code, Dexter can avoid the more uncomfortable truth that this was an event that changed him because it was driven by attachment, not justice. Harry's imagined presence becomes the key tool in this rationalization. Dexter sees Harry in visions, hears his voice in quiet moments, and those hallucinated conversations always nudge him back towards self-preservation. The real Harry never wrote "kill your own brother" to protect your cover into the rulebook. Yet Dexter's mind supplies a ghostly approval, turning Brian's death into a posthumous lesson. Sometimes the code demands the unthinkable. We're going to dive deep into this because it shows how elastic the rules already are. Here we get the psychological gymnastics. Instead of admitting, Brian is code compliant, but Deb is my emotional anchor, Dexter reframes Brian as a threat to the code itself. If Brian pulls Dexter away from ritual, victim vetting, and secrecy, then eliminating him becomes a defensive move for the Dark Passenger's operating system. The problem is obvious. Once anyone who endangers Dexter's structure can be treated like a target, the line between killer and victim starts to blur. This would be the start of a new, unwritten rule. Protecting loved ones, especially Deb, can override every other principle. The original pillars, only kill those who deserve it, gather absolute proof, never get caught, are still repeated out loud. But in practice, Brian's death adds a hidden clause. If someone threatens Dexter's cover or Deb's safety, they can be sacrificed, even if they technically fit the code or have committed no crime at all. Pattern interrupt. Brian is not the last acceptable casualty. In Season 2, the same logic will be pointed at a target who is far more innocent than the ice truck killer. James Dokes, the one man in Dexter's life who actually discovers the truth and sees him clearly, will become the next test of this rationalized exception. And once that door is open, the long-term effects of Dexter's choice to prioritize his world over the code's spirit will only accelerate. Season 2 takes that door and blows it wide open. The Bay Harbor Butcher case is the moment when "don't get caught" stops being just one rule in Harry's code and starts devouring everything else around it. Let's kick things off with the discovery that makes this possible. Divers pull up black garbage bags from the ocean floor, revealing Dexter's dismembered victims, the underwater graveyard he thought was invisible. Overnight, his private dumping ground becomes a city-wide crime scene, and the same homicide unit that relies on his blood work is suddenly hunting his dark passenger. The investigation forces Dexter to watch colleagues examine his patterns, his cuts, his ritual, as abstract Bay Harbor butcher evidence, not realizing they are literally holding his life in their hands. Throughout his life, the Code's first command has been simple: never get caught. In Season 1, that principle mostly meant careful planning and clean kills. In Season 2, it mutates into something far more corrosive. To survive the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, Dexter starts tampering with the very system Harry once tried to work within. He moves remains, alters reports, and engineers misdirection so the FBI will chase a phantom instead of the truth sitting at their own microscope. James Dokes is the human embodiment of that truth. From the pilot, Dokes feels Dexter's emptiness. He tails him, challenges him, refuses to be charmed by the labored persona everyone else buys. When Dokes discovers the blood slide box, the private trophies that link Dexter to the butcher killings, his suspicion in his self-defense strategy. Enter Lila, the other catalyst. Lila is guilty, volatile, and drawn to Dexter's urges, but he allows her proximity because she offers something the Code never did: emotional validation. When she burns the cabin and kills Dokes, framing him as the Bay Harbor butcher, Dexter lets the lie stand. He does not kill Lila to avenge an innocent man, he uses her crime as an escape hatch. An event that changed the moral balance of the series is treated, by Dexter, as a lucky break. Season 2 is where we're going to dive deep into the central question of the Code. Is it a moral boundary, or just a survival tactic? By the end of the Bay Harbor butcher arc, Don't Get Caught has overridden only kill killers, never harm the innocent, and even Harry's hope that his son might live a life with less destruction. The long-term effects of that shift will echo in every later relationship, from Miguel Prado to Debra and La Huerta, as Dexter keeps choosing his own safety over the principles he claims to live by. If Don't Get Caught has quietly climbed to the top of Dexter's priorities, framing James Dokes as the Bay Harbor butcher is the moment that new hierarchy becomes undeniable. Throughout his life, Dexter has claimed the Code keeps his dark passenger aimed only at true killers. In Season 2, that claim collides with an innocent man's career, freedom, and entire identity. Let's kick things off with the mechanics of the frame-up, because this is where Dexter's forensic brilliance turns predatory. After Dokes discovers the blood slide box and confronts him, Dexter realizes the investigation is closing in. He steals back the slides, recreates his signature trophies, and plants them in Dokes' car and personal spaces, using his intimate knowledge of Miami Metro evidence procedures to make the story airtight. When the cabin in the Everglades becomes their battleground, Dexter stocks it with dismemberment tools, plastic, and incriminating materials that mirror his real kill rooms, effectively building a museum of his crimes and slapping Dokes' name on the door. On paper, Harry's Code never says, "Don't frame your coworkers," but the spirit is obvious. Channel the urges toward guilty victims, avoid collateral damage, and never let innocent people pay for Dexter's need to kill. Harry's despair after seeing one of Dexter's kill rooms makes it clear that harming the blameless was never part of the deal. So when Dexter weaponizes his training as a blood spatter analyst to destroy Dokes' reputation, the betrayal runs deeper than a technical rule break. It's an event that changed the moral meaning of the Code itself. Dexter's rationalization is telling. He paints Dokes as dangerous, unstable, obsessed. Dokes tails him, threatens him, and refuses to back down, so Dexter starts blurring categories the Code once kept separate. Instead of asking, "Is he a killer who deserves my table?" Dexter asks, "Is he a threat to my life, my cover, my freedom?" That shift allows his dark passenger to treat a relentless cop as if he were just another monster, even though the only crime Dokes has discovered is the truth about Dexter. Crucially, Dexter never plunges the knife himself. Lila ultimately kills Dokes and blows up the cabin. But framing Dokes as the Bay Harbor butcher means Dexter knowingly sets in motion a chain of consequences that will end this man's life one way or another: prison, execution, or death by association. His choice is clear. The Don't Get Caught clause outweighs only kill killers, never harm the innocent, and any lingering echo of Harry's hope. By the end of Season 2, the biggest casualty of this arc is not just Dokes' reputation. It is Dexter's ability to keep pretending that, when cornered, He doesn't hurt innocent people. From this point on, we're going to dive deep into a version of the code that is less moral compass and more survival script. A pattern that will resurface with Miguel Prado, La Guerta, and finally Debra as the long-term effects of this compromise come due. The cabin explosion is where that survival script, Dexter's confession about his urges, becomes romantic destiny. Dokes is not a wronged cop. He is an obstacle. She douses the cabin in gasoline, lights the fire, and walks away as the explosion kills Dokes and conveniently vaporizes Dexter's most immediate threat. Dexter never lit that match, but his lies, his code, and his choice to keep Dokes caged create the perfect stage. Dexter's reaction is the real fracture point. When he sees the obliterated cabin, there is horror, but there is also relief. The problem has been violently solved without him having to directly kill a man who does not meet the code. Throughout his life, Dexter has clung to Harry's rule that innocent people are not victims. Here, he stands over Dokes' remains and makes a different choice. He does not confess, he does not redirect suspicion, he lets the narrative harden that Dokes was the Bay Harbor butcher. This is an event that changed the deeper spirit of the code. On paper, Dexter can argue technicalities. He did not strike the blow. Dokes had discovered too much. Leela is the actual murderer. But in practice, Dexter allows an innocent man to die in his place, and a guilty woman to walk free, at least temporarily. The code, which was supposed to be about only killing those who deserve it and never harming bystanders, becomes a shield for self-interest. The dark passenger is satisfied, the secret is safe, and the consequences fall on someone else's corpse. When Dexter later tracks Leela to Paris, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. He kills her not because he has patiently gathered proof for a ritual kill aligned with Harry's ideals, but because Lila is a personal loose end who knows too much about his life and his urges. The Paris kill feels like cleanup, not justice. We're going to dive deep into that distinction in later arcs, but here it marks the moment where the code stops restraining Dexter and starts rationalizing whatever keeps him safe. From the audience's perspective, the cabin explosion is where Dexter's moral self-image can no longer be fully believed, and Dexter knows it. If Harry's code could not stop him from letting Dokes burn, what chance does it have when the next person discovers the truth and refuses to stay quietly in a cage? If the cabin proved the code could be bent to save Dexter, Rita proves it can be bent to let Dexter feel. The explosion isolates him morally. Rita and the kids do something more dangerous. They make that isolation unbearable. Let's kick things off with Dexter's original plan for Rita. She begins as camouflage, a trauma survivor girlfriend whose disinterest in sex conveniently keeps his homicidal urges and his daily life in separate boxes. Throughout his life, Harry drilled in the need to blend in, and a quiet, damaged single mother is perfect cover. She explains the blood spatter analyst, who never dates, never drinks too much, never loses control. In those early seasons, Rita is not a partner, she is a prop in service of the code. But this would be the start of an event that changed Dexter more than any killer on his table. The more time he spends with Rita, Astor, and Cody, the more the dark passenger has to share space with something Harry never accounted for: attachment. Small choices signal the shift. He leaves stalking targets to attend school events. He misses opportunities to kill because a family dinner runs long. The code says blend in, but it never imagined that blending could become belonging, that the fake role might generate real priorities. This creates a structural problem inside Harry's rules. The code is designed for a lone predator who can vanish at will, not a husband and stepfather whose absence raises questions. When Dexter chooses a parent-teacher conference over tracking a future victim, he is not just rescheduling a kill, he is letting someone remain free, because family obligations come first. The long-term effects of those choices ripple outward, as Dylan now exposes him. Marriage, a baby, a house in the suburbs, every element that makes him safer emotionally makes him more vulnerable strategically. Enemies can discover, target, and exploit this normal life. And that vulnerability will not stay theoretical. When someone like Trinity enters the picture, or when Lumen pulls Dexter into a different kind of partnership, this emotional attachment will directly fuel code violations. The family man mask will become both his greatest cover and the crack that lets everything dangerous in. That crack widens in Season 3, when Dexter does something even more dangerous than falling in love. He lets someone else into the code. Let's kick things off with Miguel Prado, a powerful assistant district attorney whose entire life is built around the law, public image, and punishment. Miguel enters Dexter's orbit through an event that changed both of their trajectories, the accidental killing of Miguel's brother Oscar during a chaotic drug bust. Dexter chases Oscar to a rooftop, tackles him, and watches him fall to his death. Oscar was armed, high, and involved with violent criminals. But this was not a planned ritual kill. No plastic, no trophies, no absolute proof. Already, the code is bending under pressure. Throughout his life, Dexter has believed that Harry's rules could turn his urges into a twisted form of justice. Miguel, grieving and furious at a system that failed his family, discovers a darker, more opportunistic angle. When Dexter later eliminates Freebo, the gang member Miguel blames for Oscar's spiral, Miguel senses something off. The Ada, who lives in courtrooms, begins to see that the quiet blood analyst might be doing what the courts cannot, personally selecting victims and making them disappear. Once Miguel understands, he does not react with horror or fear. He reacts with fascination. To Miguel, the code is not a restraint, it is a weapon, a tool for targeting enemies who slip through legal fingers. He pushes to be included, begging Dexter to let him in on the truth, then insisting on witnessing and eventually participating in a kill. This would be the start of Dexter's most explicit attempt to step into Harry's role, but without Harry's skepticism or guilt. Dexter walks Miguel through the rituals, the research, the plastic, the confrontation with evidence, the knife. He emphasizes that they only kill killers, that proof is everything, that the dark passenger must be controlled by rules. On the surface, it looks like mentorship. Underneath, it is a profound violation of the original design. Harry built the code for one damaged child. Sharing it with a charismatic, ambitious Ada turns a private coping mechanism into a shared ideology. The long-term effects of that choice are immediate. Miguel quickly begins twisting the code, pushing Dexter toward Ellen Wolf, a defense attorney who embarrasses Miguel in court. Miguel frames her as a legitimate target, but his real motive is personal humiliation and political gain. He also skips the hard work of gathering absolute proof, trusting his anger and instincts instead of evidence. The rule that once gave Dexter a thin barrier between justice and murder becomes, in Miguel's hands, a flexible excuse to kill. Season 3 becomes a test. Is Harry's code a stable moral structure, or just a story Dexter tells himself? Once it leaves Harry's control and Dexter's solitary mind, it mutates into exactly what Harry feared, a justification system that empowers the most ruthless person in the room. And this experiment in shared vigilantism will set the stage for even more dangerous partners and progs later on. If Miguel's partnership shows how the code mutates when shared, Oscar Prado shows how fragile it is even when Dexter is acting alone. Before Miguel ever discovers the truth, his entire connection to Dexter is built on a kill that breaks one of Harry's most basic rules: be absolutely certain. At that instant, almost every hallmark of Harry's code disappears. There is no kill room, no plastic sheeting, no tools laid out with ritual precision. Dexter doesn't have blood slides ready, there is no trophy taken, and crucially, there is no absolute proof that Oscar deserves to die. All Dexter really has is context, a drug den, a gun, and the assumption that a man in this place must be a criminal. Throughout his life, Dexter has told himself the code separates him from ordinary killers. Here, the dark passenger acts first, and the code tries to catch up. Afterward, Dexter does what he always does when reality threatens his self-image: he rationalizes. He reviews Oscar's record, his connections to violent dealers, and retrofits the narrative so Oscar fits the code. In Dexter's mind, this wasn't an impulsive kill. It was an event that changed from accident to justified execution the moment he could convince himself Oscar was a bad guy. The truth is that the sequence is reversed. The kill comes first, the certainty comes second, and that inversion quietly undercuts everything Harry tried to build. Miguel's grief locks that violation into Dexter's life. Miguel sees Dexter as the man who tried to save his troubled brother, not the man whose reckless pursuit helped cause his death. Their friendship, and later their shared vigilantism, grows out of this one night in the drug house. Harry's code is supposed to prevent collateral damage, yet here it becomes the invisible foundation for a toxic bond. The long-term effects of this single misstep ripple outward: an unstable ally, new victims, and a widening gap between what Dexter claims to follow and what he actually does. Oscar's death exposes how quickly Dexter abandons procedure when surprised or emotionally triggered. Faced with chaos, he doesn't pause to gather evidence. He lunges, improvises, and then rewrites the story. This would be the start of a pattern that only gets worse, because the next time Dexter's certainty slips, the person on the other end of that knife won't be a stranger in a drug house, and the consequences will cut far closer to home. That pattern of improvising in the moment becomes crucial once Dexter stops operating alone. Because the next time he abandons procedure, it's not in a panic, it's in a classroom. Dexter decides to become Harry. Let's kick things off with the mechanics of that decision. With Miguel Prado, Dexter doesn't just share his secret, he opens up the entire operating system. He walks Miguel through stalking a target, gathering independent evidence, confirming guilt beyond doubt, and then building the plastic-wrapped kill room as a sacred space. The ritual Harry drilled into him, confrontation, photos of victims, the confession before the kill, gets passed down almost like a family heirloom. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated the code as a private religion. With Miguel, he tries to found a church. At first, Miguel appears to accept every rule. He listens when Dexter explains why the dark passenger needs boundaries. He participates in the first shared kill, follows the script, and even echoes Dexter's language about deserving victims. This would be the start of an alliance that, on the surface, looks like the code working perfectly. A corrupt system corrected by two meticulous avengers. The fantasy is that Harry's principles are finally expanding beyond one damaged son. Then comes the fracture point: Ellen Wolf, a defense attorney, not a murderer, whose greatest crime in Miguel's mind is humiliating him in court and protecting clients he believes are guilty. Miguel stalks her, lies about his target, and uses everything Dexter taught him: the surveillance, the secrecy, the kill room, to pursue a personal grudge. When Dexter discovers Miguel has chosen Ellen, the horror is specific. The code has become a weapon for vengeance, not justice. Here the show delivers a pattern interrupt. For seasons, the narrative has framed Dexter as the controlled rewriting Harry's code on the fly to contain Miguel, adding clauses that conveniently excuse his own past choices while condemning Miguel's. Harry's original pillars, never get caught, only kill those who deserve it, mutate into a moving goalpost designed to keep Dexter in control. The long-term effects of this are brutal. To protect the code, Dexter kills Miguel for violating his rules, staging it as another righteous execution. Yet by this point, Dexter has already broken Harry's version multiple times, from emotional kills to framing innocence. The irony is devastating. Miguel dies for misusing a doctrine that was never as pure as Dexter claimed, setting up an even darker question about who will be punished the next time the code fails. Miguel's death for misusing a broken doctrine leads directly into Dexter's most dangerous experiment yet, trying to live the code, keep the cover, and be a devoted father all at once. Season 4 is where those roles collide, and where the next violation will not just cost a partner or a friend, but an entire family. Let's kick things off with Arthur Mitchell, the so-called Trinity Killer. On the surface, Arthur is everything Dexter claims to want to be. A long-running predator who has killed for decades, a respected church volunteer, and a man with a seemingly functional wife and children. Throughout his life, Dexter has looked for models to manage his killing urges, from Harry's code to Miguel's vigilante fantasy. Arthur appears to be the perfected version of that dream, a man who has balanced murder and domestic life without being discovered. This is an event that changed Dexter's internal calculus. Instead of stalking Arthur as a standard target, Dexter becomes fascinated, almost reverent. Rather than simply kill Trinity, he decides to learn from him, embedding himself in Arthur's world as Kyle Butler, joining the house projects, family dinners, and even private confessions. The code's rule to observe from a distance and gather proof quietly is replaced by deep, reckless immersion. Dexter is no longer just hunting a killer, he is auditioning for Arthur's life. At the same time, Harrison's birth and Rita's growing expectations compress Dexter's schedule to a breaking point. Sleepless nights with a crying baby, suburban chores in the new house, and constant demands to be present as a husband and father all eat into the meticulous preparation the code requires. The rule to plan every kill, to verify every victim's guilt with absolute certainty, gets squeezed by school events, pediatrician visits, and neighborhood barbecues. Dexter starts cutting corners in surveillance, rushing cleanups, and improvising kills in ways Harry never intended. Harry's ghost responds by escalating the warnings. Again and again, Harry appears to tell Dexter that chasing Arthur as a mentor is overreach, that balancing a newborn, a marriage, a demanding job, and a serial killer apprenticeship is not sustainable. Yet the more pressed Dexter feels by domestic life, the more he tunes that inner voice out. Harry's authority, already weakened by previous compromises, is now openly challenged as Dexter insists he can handle everything. This would be the start of a new kind of code failure. By idealizing Trinity, Dexter overlooks the cracks, the terror in Arthur's family, the escalating brutality of his cycle, the way his double life is held together by fear, not harmony. In trying to copy Arthur instead of eliminating him, Dexter misses critical red flags and delays the kill far past the point of safety. The long-term effects of that delay will be catastrophic, as the series shows that when the code bends under pressure from family life, the consequences no longer stay contained to Dexter's victims, they come home. Season 4 ends up proving that the greatest danger is not when Dexter breaks the rules in anger, but when he convinces himself the rules still protect everyone while he quietly abandons them. That quiet abandonment becomes most visible in Season 4, when time itself turns into Dexter's most dangerous accomplice. Fiction of the time he once devoted to a single target, trusting prior case files more than present tense proof. Harry's voice questions whether Dexter has really discovered the full truth about Benny's current life. But the dark passenger is on a schedule now, and the doubt gets brushed aside. Throughout his life, Dexter treated the code's investigative rigor as sacred: follow, confirm, verify, then kill. In Season 4, that order starts to blur. The vandalism-prone jogger who smashes his car windows, for example, becomes a near victim based almost entirely on anger and inconvenience. Dexter stalks him impulsively, fueled by sleep deprivation and frustration, and Harry appears in the passenger seat as a conscience in ghost form, asking if this really meets the standard. Dexter backs off at the last moment, but the scene exposes how thin the barrier has become when his schedule is packed and his patience is gone. We're going to dive deep into how fatherhood and marriage transform the code from a safeguard into a burden. Late-night feedings, crying Harrison, Rita's suspicions, and the constant commute to the new house leave Dexter chronically exhausted. The ritual plastic wrap, the careful research, the cross-checking of evidence all start to feel like obstacles between him and a quiet night's sleep. When Harry questions him about whether a potential target has truly earned death, Dexter's response shifts from thoughtful justification to irritation. The internal mentor who once taught discipline becomes an annoying voice that threatens his ability to maintain the illusion of a normal life. This would be the start of a deeper thematic shift. Dexter begins valuing his lifestyle over the code's supposed moral precision. The rule "only kill those who deserve it" was always flexible, but in Season 4, the flexibility comes from convenience rather than moral ambiguity. Minor procedural violations, less surveillance, thinner evidence, more reliance on hunches might look small compared to the spectacular kills, yet they carry long-term effects. Each time Dexter dismisses Harry's doubts to keep his calendar intact, the code moves one step closer to being a story he tells himself rather than a standard he actually follows. All of this erosion feeds directly into his greatest blind spot, Arthur Mitchell. Dexter is so busy protecting his schedule that he underestimates Trinity's danger to his own family until it is far too late. The man he studies as a model of balance is, in reality, an event that changed every part of his life. And the question becomes whether these shortcuts were just cracks in the armor or the reason the monster finally walked right into his home. Arthur Mitchell doesn't just expose a weakness in Dexter's system, he detonates it. The end of Season 4 is where the code stops being an abstract set of rules and starts demanding a body as payment. Let's kick things off with that finale sequence. Dexter tracks Trinity, confronts him in the garage, and finally kills him on the kill table, believing he has neutralized the threat. The Bay Harbor butcher has outplayed the so-called perfect family man killer. Dexter dumps the body, breathes out, and heads home expecting a quiet escape with Rita and the kids. Instead, he walks into the crime scene that mirrors his own origin, Rita dead in the bathtub, Harrison crying on the bathroom floor, sitting in a pool of blood. An event that changed his life forever is now repeating, this time with Dexter as the architect. Throughout his life, the code has been framed as a shield: only kill those who deserve it, gather proof, never get caught, protect the innocent by eliminating predators. Applied correctly, Arthur Mitchell should have been a priority emergency, not a semester-long independent study. Once Dexter discovered Trinity's identity, pattern, and decades-long streak of victims, the code's logic should have demanded immediate action. This man kills entire families. Hesitation equals bodies. Instead, Dexter chooses delay. He keeps Trinity alive as a teacher, a living case study in how to balance murder with domestic life. Arthur's plans, and manipulating Miami Metro to stay close to the case, Arthur slips the net. He learns Dexter's real name, tracks his address, and walks right into the Morgan home. The code's core principle, never let a killer close to the people who make life worth living, is shredded by Dexter's own strategy. In the aftermath, Dexter's guilt is explicit. He recognizes that Rita died because he let Arthur live too long, because he treated a family annihilator as a mentor instead of a target. This is a massive code failure, and Dexter knows it. Harry's teachings, which were supposed to prevent another child from being born in blood, have instead produced one. Here's the pattern interrupt. Rita's death should either sanctify the code or shatter it. So what happens next? Dexter oscillates. Part of him doubles down, treating the code as penance, a way to make sure Harrison never pays again for his father's urges. Another part begins to see the cracks. If this system could not protect Rita, maybe it was never protection at all, just a story that made killing feel controlled. The long-term effects of this moment ripple through every later breach, and the question going forward is whether Dexter is still following Harry or only pretending to, while his dark passenger quietly takes over the controls. If Rita's death cracked the illusion of safety, Lumen is the moment Dexter stops even pretending the code is fixed. Throughout his life, the rule was simple on paper: only kill killers, work alone, and never let emotions steer the blade. Season 5 asks what happens when someone else's trauma speaks directly to his dark passenger. Let's kick things off with Lumen's entrance, which is literally in a kill room. Dexter tracks Boyd Fowler, a dead animal removal worker who is actually disposing of human bodies, and follows the code by setting up a meticulous ritual. But after Boyd is on the table and Dexter gets his confession, he discovers a hidden prisoner, Lumen, chained, terrified, and a survivor of a brutal rape and torture ring. This is an event that changed the trajectory of his grief after Rita, because for the first time, Dexter is face-to-face with a living victim in the middle of his process. At first, Lumen is a liability. She has seen the plastic, the knife, the body. By the logic of the code, the safest move is to eliminate the witness or disappear from her life completely. Dexter even considers killing her to protect his secret, a cold extension of Harry's never-get-caught rule. But Lumen's trauma mirrors his own origin story so precisely that the usual distance collapses. Her detailed memory of multiple attackers, her obsessive need for names and faces, and her inability to move on until they are dead all resonate with his urges in a way no one else has. This would be the start of Dexter's first real partnership in killing. As Lumen shifts from panicked captive to determined survivor, Dexter gradually recognizes that she does not just fear his darkness, she understands it, and, in her own way, shares it. He makes a conscious choice. Instead of silencing her, he brings her in. He trains her in the ritual, lets her participate in the kills, and even hands her the knife. The code, which was designed for a solitary predator, suddenly has a second member who was not born a killer at all. To make that possible, Dexter bends rule after rule. Targets are chosen on an accelerated timeline, driven by Lumen's emotional flashbacks rather than his usual slow forensic certainty. He accepts thinner evidence, relying on her memories and a pattern of abuse instead of the absolute proof Harry demanded. The standard of deserving it widens from active killers to anyone involved in the ring, including former participants who may have stopped. The partnership also pulls him out of his careful camouflage. He breaks cover more often, risks surveillance, and prioritizes Lumen's need for vengeance over the long-term effects of exposure. Season 5 doesn't just add another killer to Dexter's tally, it adds a new category of justification. Let's kick things off with Boyd himself. On paper, he is a classic Harry-approved target, a dead animal pickup guy tied to the Barrel Girls' disappearances, a predator who drugs and tortures women before sealing their bodies in barrels. Dexter does the homework, gathers proof, and sets up a kill room in Boyd's house. Plastic, photos of victims, the ritual knife, and a calm confession before the plunge. By every visible metric, this is a standard code kill. But then Dexter hears the thumping in the shed. Lumen, bound, terrified, and still alive, is discovered as an exception Harry never prepared him for, a surviving victim who looks directly at Dexter in the aftermath. Throughout his life, Dexter has kept his dark passenger and his victims sealed off from anyone who might witness the truth. Lumen shatters that separation. She experiences him not as a theory or a rumor, but as the man who killed her torturer in front of her eyes. From that moment, the Barrel Girls case stops being about anonymous evil and becomes hyper-specific. Lumen does not want justice in the abstract, she wants the men who hurt her. Each name on the list is tied to a memory of abuse, a sensory flashback, a night she barely survived. When Dexter starts helping her hunt down the rest of the ring, the code is no longer just only kill killers. It is only kill the men who did this to Lumen. This would be the start of a new motivation. Dexter tells himself these men fit the code anyway, and many of them do. But the emotional engine has shifted. The kills are paced by Lumen's panic attacks, her need to confront, her need to watch. Dexter's inner narration reframes murder as therapy. If Lumen can participate, if she can see them die, maybe her life can resume. Murder becomes treatment. Harry's ghost becomes the dissenting voice. In scene after scene, Harry questions whether Dexter is doing this because the targets qualify, or because Lumen makes him feel needed, even loved. Is this about the code, or about the rare chance to be fully seen and not rejected? Dexter refuses to separate those motives. He insists that helping Lumen is an extension of Harry's rules, not a corruption of them. An event that changed the trajectory of the code is buried here. By tying his ritual to someone else's emotional closure, Dexter quietly accepts that the standard is no longer purely moral or evidentiary. It is relational. If someone matters enough, their pain can authorize a kill. The long-term effects of that shift will echo into Hannah, Deborah, and beyond, where love and need routinely outrun the code's limits. And once murder can heal, the next question becomes unavoidable. What happens when the person who needs healing is not a survivor like Lumen, but someone even closer to Dexter? If murder can heal, then Lumen is the test case. She is the one person whose treatment ends. And when her healing is over, Dexter does something almost unthinkable for the Bay Harbor butcher. He lets the only witness to an entire revenge spree simply walk away. Let's kick things off with the end of Season 5. After weeks of tracking and killing the men who raped and tortured her, Lumen stands in the same barrel warehouse where her trauma began. Jordan Chase is dead on Dexter's table. The list of victims is complete. And then, in a quiet morning after scene in Dexter's apartment, Lumen tells him the dark passenger is gone. The urges to kill that once mirrored his have vanished. For her, this was finite, a response to an event that changed everything, not a lifelong condition. Throughout his life, Dexter believed his own urges were permanent, fundamental, almost neurological. So Lumen's recovery is destabilizing. Here is someone who shared the ritual, the plastic, the knife, and then simply stops. The series frames it like remission. Her dark passenger, he does not demand ongoing silence through fear or shared murder. He does not insist that her dark passenger will return and that she belongs in his world. He lets her leave Miami, free to start a new life, even after she directly participated in Chase's kill and could expose him at any time. Dexter narrates this as love and trust. He accepts that her need to kill was temporary and frames his choice as respecting her healing more than his own safety. On the surface, this looks like growth. For once, he is willing to live with consequences he cannot fully control. He allows the possibility that someone who truly discovered him can go on existing outside his orbit. But if we're going to dive deep, the decision also looks like another rewrite driven by emotion. Lumen matters, so the code bends. The same man who framed Dokes and later will rationalize killing to protect Debra suddenly believes in radical trust when the person involved is a romantic partner who made him feel less alone. This would be the start of a dangerous pattern. When affection is present, mercy is possible. When it is absent, the code becomes a weapon. The long-term effects of that double standard are brutal. Because the next time Dexter faces someone who knows too much, La Guerta on the trail of the Bay Harbor butcher or Oliver Saxon in custody, there will be no gentle goodbye, no plane ticket, and no belief that trust can be enough. That absence of mercy sets the stage for a strange detour in Season 6, when Dexter briefly wonders if the code is even the right compass. From a pyromaniac gang member in a baptismal font to apocalyptic tableau painted in blood, this season forces Dexter to ask a question Harry never prepared him for. What if some killers can actually change? Let's kick things off with Brother Sam, a former gang enforcer turned auto shop owner and unconventional pastor. Brother Sam is a man with a violent past and real killing urges, exactly the type of target Harry's code would flag as a potential future victim. Dexter approaches him as a predator, inserting himself into Sam's orbit, fully expecting to confirm that the redemption story is a lie and that Sam belongs on a table. Throughout his life, Dexter has divided the world into only two categories: killers and innocents. Brother Sam breaks that binary. When Dexter watches Sam protect a young employee instead of exploiting him, when he sees Sam pray with genuine humility after being shot, Dexter discovers something the code never accounted for: sustained, costly change. He had gone in planning to kill, knife ready, and ritual prepared. But he makes a different choice. He walks away. In that moment, the code stretches to include the possibility of redemption, not just proof of guilt. This would be the start of Dexter's brief moral crisis. Brother Sam doesn't just survive, he becomes a spiritual mentor, speaking directly to Dexter's dark passenger. Sam insists that the darkness is not all that Dexter is, that there is a part of him capable of light, of forgiveness. When Sam dies in the hospital and Dexter imagines a vision of him urging mercy instead of vengeance, Dexter hesitates before hunting Nick, the shooter. The urge to kill is still there, but for the first time, the question is not does he deserve it. It's what does killing him make Dexter? Running parallel is the Doomsday Killer case, with its biblical plagues, twisted iconography, and an obsession with sin and judgment. Travis Marshall's murders push Dexter to confront religious language Harry always dismissed. If sin can be forgiven, who decides? If there is a higher judge, is Dexter permanently outside that mercy? The spectacle of these victims, arranged as apocalyptic warnings, turns every crime scene into a mirror for Dexter's own fear that he is beyond saving. The crisis sharpens around Harrison. Dexter watches his son at Brotherhood, a decision that will drag Deborah into the same darkness he once believed he could manage alone. That choice becomes brutally literal with Travis Marshall. The moment Dexter stops reaching for grace and returns to pure, sharpened necessity is not in a quiet reflection, but in a church lit by fire and apocalypse. Let's kick things off with Dexter's lowest physical point in the Doomsday arc, his capture. Travis drugs him, binds him in plastic on the rooftop, and prepares Dexter as the final sacrifice in his Revelation tableau. Throughout his life, Dexter has controlled the ritual. The table, the tools, the narrative of guilt all belong to him. Here, that power is inverted. He is the one gagged, marked, and positioned as prey, while Travis preaches about cleansing the world. It is an event that changed the balance between hunter and hunted, showing Dexter exactly what it looks like when someone else's holy mission decides he deserves to die. Dexter's escape from that rooftop is quick and vicious. He breaks free, fights Travis hand-to-hand, and forces him over the edge, but he does not finish the kill there. That's important. He could end it in the chaos of the rooftop struggle. Instead, he drugs Travis and transports him, reclaiming his ritual authority. The final confrontation will not be an accident or a brawl. It will be a deliberate reassertion of the code. We're going to dive deep into that decision to bring Travis back to the church. Dexter chooses sacred space as his kill room. He strings Travis up on the altar, plastic everywhere, knives laid out, but he also stages the body as a twisted echo of Travis's own apocalyptic imagery. The beast of Revelation becomes the victim on Dexter's table. His dark passenger and Travis's religious mania collide into one hybrid tableau. This would be the start of a new, colder phase. The ritual is no longer just about Harry's rules, it is about aesthetic domination over his enemies' belief systems. Emotionally, this kill plays like a backlash against Dexter's earlier doubts with Brother Sam. Sam offered a vision where the urges could be acknowledged without becoming destiny, where forgiveness might matter more than punishment. On that altar, Dexter rejects that path. He calls Travis a killer, recites the evidence, and drives the knife in with renewed conviction. The code becomes his faith again, not a compromise he questions, but a weapon he wields without apology. The symbolic weight of doing this in a church cannot be overstated. Surrounded by stained glass and crucifixes, Dexter is effectively choosing whose judgment counts. Not God's, not the law's, not Brother Sam's, only Harry's code. In that moment, he crowns his own dark passenger as the final authority over life and death. And that is exactly when Deb walks in. She discovers Dexter mid-kill, framed by the altar, knife in hand, Travis bleeding out like a sacrifice. For the first time, Dexter is forced to see the code through Deb's horrified eyes. The long-term effects of that gaze, and how it shatters any illusion that the code is noble, are about to redefine every kill that follows. Because once Deb has seen that church, what does necessary really mean anymore? In that church, the word necessary dies on contact with reality. The tableau is pure ritual, plastic sheeting, bound victim, knife raised. But when Deborah Morgan walks in and sees Dexter plunge the blade into Travis Marshall, the image of her dependable brother is destroyed in a single motion. The Bay Harbor butcher is no longer an abstract case, he is family. Throughout his life, Dexter has controlled the narrative around his dark passenger. He is the quiet, blood-spatter analyst, the helpful brother, the man Harry saved by giving him a code. Inside that church, those roles collide. Deb is framed by the doorway, Dexter framed by the altar, Travis bleeding out as a literal sacrifice to Harry's design. This is an event that changed not just Deb's view of Dexter, but the status of the code itself. For the first time, someone who knows both immediate reaction is revealing. He does not drop the knife and surrender. He does not flee. He starts explaining. He reaches for the code as if it were armor, insisting that Travis deserves to die, that this kill is controlled, justified, necessary. In Dexter's mind, Harry's code is a moral shield that can make Deb understand, maybe even accept, what she has just discovered. If Harry could live with it, why can't Deb? That question becomes the pattern interrupt. Because Deb learns, almost at once, that Harry did not just live with it. He built it. When Dexter reveals that Harry knew about the urges, trained him, and laid out rules for killing, Deb's entire childhood is reframed. Her heroic father, the cop who taught her to chase bad guys, was secretly nurturing a serial killer in their home. The long-term effects of that revelation are brutal. Harry's suicide is no longer a mysterious tragedy, but the consequence of seeing what his son had become on a kill table. From this point, Deb is not just judging Dexter, she is judging Harry, the code, and the entire story her family told about justice. As lieutenant, she knows the law. As sister, she knows Dexter's humanity. Standing between those truths, she becomes the harshest possible judge of the code's claims of necessity. And this would be the start of Dexter's most extreme violations yet. To protect Deb from legal fallout, from guilt, from the truth about her own complicity, he will bend and finally abandon whatever principles Harry left him. The next time Dexter has to choose between the code and Deb, the consequences will be irreversible. If Deb's compromise was the emotional crack in Harry's code, Lagerta is the institutional hammer that slams into it. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated the police department as camouflage, a safe habitat for a predator. Season 7 turns that habitat against him. Let's kick things off with the moment that quietly rewrites the Bay Harbor Butcher legend. At the Doomsday Killer's final crime scene, after Deb has already discovered Dexter's truth and helped burn Travis Marshall's body on the rooftop, a single glass bloodslide falls where it should never exist. Lagerta finds it. Not as a grieving colleague, but as a cop who once helped hunt the Bay Harbor Butcher. That tiny rectangle of blood connects two supposedly closed chapters, Doomsday and Bay Harbor. For everyone else, Dokes died as the Butcher. For Lagerta, this slide is an event that changed that narrative. She quietly pulls the old files, reopens the Bay Harbor case, and starts comparing patterns. The Marina barrel victims, the dismembered bodies, the precision of the cuts, and now a fresh slide at a new serial killer's tableau. The more she reviews, the less Dokes fits. His documented rage, his lack of forensic training, his absence of any ritual trophies. The evidence that once condemned him now reads like a frame job. This would be the start of Dexter's code coming under legal siege. Lagerta doesn't know about Harry, the dark passenger, or the carefully curated list of victims. She only sees that wherever Dexter's life intersects with major cases, bodies disappear and patterns repeat. She revisits surveillance, boat records, gas receipts, even the geography of disposal sites. The trail that Harry taught Dexter to erase starts to reappear under institutional scrutiny. As Lagerta closes in, Dexter's paranoia spikes. He loses reports, plants minor misdirections, and subtly steers Masuka's lab work away from dangerous conclusions, all while performing normalcy in the bullpen. The code's rule to blend in with ordinary life now demands active manipulation of the very system it claimed to respect. Protecting the secret becomes just as important as targeting the guilty. Deb, now fully complicit, is dragged into this institutional conflict. As lieutenant, she should be Lagerta's natural ally. Instead, she sabotages investigations, lies in official interviews, and pressures Dexter to be more careful. Lagerta is not a murderer. She is a cop doing her job. When Dexter starts planning her death, the code's last pretense of moral purpose begins to collapse, setting up the most blatant violation in his entire life. Because to stop Lagerta, Dexter will finally choose his freedom over any definition of justice, and Deb will be forced to decide whether she will cross that line with him. Dexter choosing Lagerta's death over the law is a turning point. But there is one relationship where the code doesn't just bend under pressure, it dissolves completely in the face of desire. That relationship is Hannah McKay. Let's kick things off with who Hannah actually is. On paper, she is Dexter's ideal target. As a teenager, Hannah ran with Wayne Randall, a spree killer whose crimes left multiple bodies across several states. She helped him abduct, transport, and bury victims, then resurfaced in Miami as a seemingly reformed woman with a successful nursery business. Soon after, people around her start dying by poison, Wayne's old accomplices, a counselor, even her husband. Each death quiet, efficient, and almost impossible to prove. For a blood spatter analyst who hunts killers, Hannah is not a mystery. She is a pattern. Throughout his life, Dexter has relied on the code to filter his urges. Hannah fits every criterion: a history of murder, ongoing suspicion, a trail of convenient corpses. Dexter's initial response is automatic. He stalks her, gathers evidence, and prepares the table. This would be the start of another clean, code-approved kill. But then something happens that Harry never prepared him for. Dexter feels a connection. The interrogation that should end in a confession becomes flirtation. The predator and the potential victim recognize something in each other, a shared comfort with death. The crucial moment is Hannah's confession. Under Dexter's controlled pressure, she calmly admits to killing with Wayne and to poisoning later victims on her own. No ambiguity, no doubt, no loophole in the code. She is exactly the kind of person Harry designed the ritual for. Yet Dexter does not kill her. He walks away from the table and into her bed, transforming a confirmed target into a lover he will protect. From that point on, the violation deepens. Dexter doesn't just spare Hannah, he actively shields her from the justice system. He refuses to testify fully against her, manipulates evidence, and later helps her escape custody when Deb tries to bring her down. The man who framed Dokes to keep the code intact now undermines the law to keep a serial poisoner alive. The long-term effects of this choice ripple outward, pulling Deb further into moral chaos and proving that Harry's rules no longer sit in the driver's seat. How does Dexter justify this? He tells himself Hannah has changed, that her killings were in the past, or that her victims deserved what they got. In other words, he applies his own rationalizations to someone else and calls it growth. We're going to dive deep into that hypocrisy, because it marks a shift from the code as an external discipline to the code as a story Dexter edits whenever his dark passenger falls in love. Hannah becomes the clearest evidence that emotion now outranks principle. She is not leverage like Dokes, not a direct threat like LaGuerta. She is a choice. And that choice, to let a self-confessed killer walk free, sets the stage for an even more devastating decision, when Dexter's need to protect someone he loves will collide head-on with every rule Harry ever gave him. Hannah isn't just a temptation for Dexter's dark passenger, she becomes a direct threat to the one person who has enforced the code in his real life, Deborah. And when those loyalties collide, the code that was supposed to protect Deb ends up turning against her, reminding him that this is exactly the kind of killer Harry meant him to target. For Deb, who has already discovered the truth about Dexter's urges and agreed, reluctantly, to live with them, this feels like a clear test. If the code means anything, Hannah belongs on his table. But Dexter is trapped in a new kind of conflict. He knows Hannah is guilty. He has her confession about the counselor, he has the pattern of victims, he has the proof Harry would have demanded. And yet, he stalls. He delays surveillance, questions Deb's certainty, looks for technicalities. Emotion has infected the process. The man who once prided himself on being a careful killer who targeted bad people now bends every step of his own ritual to avoid putting Hannah under plastic. This would be the start of a quieter, but crucial, betrayal. Instead of killing Hannah, Dexter frames her. He spikes a water bottle with her own drugs, manipulates evidence, and engineers a scenario where she's arrested for attempted murder of Deb. On paper, it looks like justice, a dangerous killer taken off the street. But for the code, it's a fundamental dodge. Dexter chooses not to kill a proven murderer and instead weaponizes the legal system he supposedly abandoned when he adopted Harry's method. Deb's reaction exposes the long-term effects of that choice. She doesn't just see Dexter going soft, she sees him lying, obstructing, and using her near death as a tactic in his relationship drama. For Deb, this isn't romance, it's betrayal, of the law she swore to uphold, of the partnership where she always had Dexter's back, and of the code she's been forced to accept as the price of knowing who her brother really is. Pattern interrupt. The person Harry designed the code to protect is now endangered by Dexter's refusal to follow it. The very rules meant to keep Deb safe are reinterpreted to shield Hannah, and Deb learns that even her life can be weighed against Dexter's desires. And this moral bending is only a rehearsal. The next time Dexter asks Deb to compromise, it won't be about framing a poisoner. It will be about La Guerta, a woman on the verge of exposing the Bay Harbor butcher, and the choice will not be between prison and freedom, but between letting the truth stand and helping Dexter kill again. La Guerta at the shipping yard is not just another close call. It is the night the code stops being a moral line and becomes nothing more than a survival script for Dexter's dark passenger. Let's kick things off with the setup. La Guerta has already discovered the Bay Harbor butcher case was never really closed. She traces the blood slides, the marina records, the Bay Harbor dump site, and it all keeps circling back to Dexter. When she lures him to the shipping yard, she is not guessing. She confronts him with hard evidence, a gun, and an arrest warrant in everything but name. This is an event that changed the power dynamic. For once, the person who sees Dexter clearly is a cop with proof, not just suspicion. Dexter's response reveals how far he has drifted from Harry's original rules. He has already set up a kill scene in a nearby container, planning to drug La Guerta, frame her as working with Estrada, and make it look like she died in a criminal crossfire. This is not a killer who slipped through the justice system. La Guerta is not a murderer, not one of his typical victims, not even a vigilante. Throughout his life, Dexter insisted the code was about only killing those who deserve it, backed by absolute proof. Here, the only crime La Guerta has committed is discovering the truth and trying to stop a serial killer. The standoff crystallizes that hypocrisy. Deb arrives, gun shaking, pulled between the brother she loves and the lieutenant who represents everything she once believed about justice. La Guerta begs her to do the right thing, to shoot Dexter, to end the Bay Harbor butcher once and for all. Dexter, in turn, kneels and tells Deb to kill him, an apparent act of sacrifice that still keeps him in control of the scene. The real horror is that Deb's choice is framed as binary, either kill Dexter or kill La Guerta. There is no room left for the law to protect Deb, to keep his family intact, to preserve the double life. But that logic abandons the only kill those who deserve it rule completely. From this night on, the code is exposed as a story Dexter tells himself to feel less monstrous. Anyone who threatens his world, Dokes, Leela, La Guerta, and soon Saxon in custody, can be sacrificed. And that shift sets the stage for the final unraveling of both Dexter's relationships and the code itself in the series' endgame. La Guerta's death is not just the end of a rival, it is an event that changed Deborah Morgan on a cellular level. The code bends, then snaps, but the person who truly shatters is not Dexter. It is the sister who once believed in the badge more than anything else in her life. Let's kick things off with that New Year's Eve warehouse. La Guerta on her knees, Dexter setting up the kill, and Deb walking in on the nightmare she always feared, but never fully understood. When she pulls the trigger on La Guerta instead of Dexter, the show freezes her in that instant of impossible choice. Immediately afterward, we see the breakdown. Deb sobbing over La Guerta's body, gasping that she shot the wrong person, shaking so hard she can barely stand. From that moment on, every attempt to function, going back to work, pretending the case is closed, standing at La Guerta's memorial, is framed as performance. The secret is already poisoning her. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated killing as something that can be compartmentalized, managed with Harry's rules. Deb can't do that. Her moral compass, once rigid and almost self-righteous, becomes shattered under the weight of what she has done. By season 8, the long-term effects of that single gunshot are everywhere. Deb leaves the force, dives into a private investigator job that keeps her away from the precinct, and starts using drugs and alcohol to numb herself. She sleeps with a confidential informant, drives drunk, and deliberately puts herself in danger, as if punishment might somehow balance the scales. This would be the start of a self-destruction arc that makes clear she cannot carry Dexter's darkness without it consuming her. Dexter's response is chilling in its calm. He tries to comfort Deb, holds her, tells her that La Guerta's death was necessary, that they had no choice if they wanted to survive. In his mind, La Guerta simply joins the list of collateral victims in the war to protect the secret and preserve the code. When Deb says she hates him, when she can barely look at him, Dexter still frames the night as an unfortunate but rational move, another sacrifice to keep the dark passenger controlled. The gap between his minimized language and her raw trauma shows how far apart they now live, even while sharing the same secret. Deb's suffering exposes the lie at the heart of the code. Harry promised a system that would let Dexter kill without hurting innocence, a way to channel homicidal urges while blending into normal life. But LaGuerta was innocent, and Deb was innocent, until the code demanded their corruption. The idea that Dexter can surgically isolate his violence, that only guilty victims pay the price, collapses as Deb snorts lines in a dive bar and tells herself she belongs in hell. And this spiral is not finished. Season 8 will take Deb to an even darker place, where her body, her career, and her very identity become collateral damage for Dexter's final choices. The question is no longer whether the code protects anyone, it is how many Morgans it will destroy before the end. Season 8 opens in the rubble of that destruction, but Dexter is still pretending the structure is intact. LaGuerta is dead, Deb is gone from his life and drowning herself in drugs and guilt, and yet Dexter walks the halls of Miami Metro like nothing fundamental has changed. He bags blood, trades banter with Masika, plays the devoted single father. On the surface, the code is still in place. Underneath, it is a ghost. Rules, about making sure his victims deserve it, about never getting caught. Yet his methods are looser, more impulsive. He stalks a hitman, then abandons the plan mid-hunt when Deb crashes back into his orbit. He kills a serial killer in an airport hangar with almost no ritual, no careful vetting, just a desperate need to reassert control. The dark passenger is no longer guided, it is appeased. This is where Dr. Evelyn Vogel enters, an event that changed how the entire series frames the code. Vogel is a neuropsychiatrist who appears in Dexter's life claiming to know his secret, presenting drawings from his childhood and home videos of Harry. She reveals that she helped Harry design the code in the first place, not as a moral philosophy, but as a clinical strategy to manage a budding psychopath. To her, Dexter is not a vigilante hero. He is a successful patient. Vogel's presence recontextualizes everything. Harry's late-night talks, the rules about choosing victims, even the mantra about never getting caught, are suddenly recast as behavioral conditioning. The code was never about justice, it was about containment. This would be the start of Dexter confronting the possibility that his entire moral identity is a story built on therapy notes and police frustration. When Vogel praises his kills as beautiful, the last illusion of an external moral compass starts to crack. Then the pattern interrupt arrives, Oliver Saxon. Introduced first as Vogel's long-lost son and then discovered to be the brain surgeon, Saxon mirrors Dexter in disturbing ways. He is a meticulous killer with his own rituals, no pretense of a code, and a direct genetic link to the woman who engineered Dexter's rules. Saxon's existence forces a brutal question. If Vogel's system produced both a controlled killer and an uncontrolled one, what does that say about the code's power, or lack of it, over Dexter's urges? As Season 8 unfolds, Saxon becomes the final mirror, the last antagonist who will push Dexter to decide whether Harry's rules still mean anything, or whether they are just convenient language for choices he was always going to make. The long-term effects of that decision will define Dexter's endgame. If Saxon is the final mirror, Dr. Evelyn Vogel is the one who turns the lights on in the room. Throughout his life, Dexter believed the code was a sacred inheritance from a haunted father. With Vogel, that belief is ripped apart and replaced by clinical footage, diagnostic language, and an origin story that looks less like love and more like research. Vogel invites Dexter into her home and, instead of comforting memories, opens a digital archive. Old VH transfers flicker on the screen, showing a young Dexter in Harry's living room, answering questions about urges, knives, and dead animals. Vogel's voice is calm, almost proud, as she explains how Harry brought her in when Dexter's darkness first appeared. This was not a panicked parent grasping for moral guidance. This was a cop and a neuroscientist collaborating to observe, categorize, and shape a budding killer. Let's kick things off with what those tapes actually mean. Harry did not stumble into the code as a desperate last resort. Under Vogel's supervision, he tested boundaries, recorded reactions, and refined rules. The core idea was brutally simple. Dexter would kill anyway, so the only realistic goal was to minimize collateral damage and keep him from getting caught. The code was harm reduction, not redemption. It was never designed to make Dexter good, only less dangerous to everyone who was not on his table. When Dexter watches those videos, the impact is immediate. The man he worshipped as a guilty, loving father is suddenly also a handler, a partner in an experiment that defined his entire life. Vogel calls Dexter my perfect psychopath, praises Harry's work as if reviewing a successful case study, and frames the code as a triumph of behavioral management. For Dexter, this is an event that changed the emotional meaning of every kill he has ever committed. We're going to dive deep into that fracture. Dexter had romanticized Harry's rules as looking like conditioning. Harry's choice to channel rather than cure Dexter's killing urges becomes, in Vogel's framing, a successful protocol, not a tragic moral compromise. That reframe has dangerous consequences. Once Dexter understands he was essentially a lab subject, the rules lose their sacred aura and start to feel optional. We see the cracks widen with Saxon, when Dexter contemplates killing for personal closure rather than any coherent standard. If the code is merely behavior modification, what actually binds him to it when it conflicts with what he wants in the moment? And what happens when that last psychological leash finally snaps? When that last psychological leash finally snaps, it doesn't happen in a kill room, it happens in a fantasy of running away. And that fantasy takes shape the moment Hannah McKay returns in Season 8. No longer a charming poisoner under investigation, but a fugitive whose very presence endangers Dexter's carefully managed life. Let's kick things off with Hannah's reintroduction. She's escaped custody, slipped past the system Harry trusted and hated in equal measure, and suddenly appears in Dexter's home, drugging Deb and forcing Dexter into a choice between the code and his feelings. Under Harry's rules, a repeat killer who has already evaded justice is a textbook target. Instead, Dexter's first instinct is to protect her, hide her, lie for her, and neutralize anyone who might connect her to him. Throughout his life, the code has demanded distance from potential accomplices. With Hannah, that distance collapses. From there, Dexter's fantasy escalates. He starts openly imagining a future where he leaves Miami with Hannah and Harrison, walking away from his job, his blood slides, and the ritual that has defined his existence. This isn't just about stopping one kill. It is an event that changed the entire premise of his identity, the belief, drilled in by Harry and later reinforced by Vogel, that he is, at his core, a predator whose urges must be managed, never cured. The dream of a domestic life on the run is a direct contradiction of that premise. The dark passenger is not being channeled, it is being written out of the script. We're going to dive deep into why this matters. Harry's code is built on acceptance. Dexter will always want to kill, so he must select victims carefully and never get caught. Season 8 Dexter insists he can simply stop killing for Hannah, as if the urges are optional and the trauma that created him can be turned off by willpower and romance. He dismisses Vogel's warnings, ignores Harry's spectral disapproval, and treats years of psychological conditioning as if they were just overprotective parenting. This would be the start of Dexter openly privileging emotional desire over any coherent standard, not just in practice, but in self-concept. The long-term effects of that internal rewrite are devastating. By planning a future with Hannah and Harrison, Dexter effectively abandons the core rule to blend in as a normal family man inside the system. Instead, he plans to tear that life up overnight, a move that increases risk to everyone around him. Saxon's presence turns that risk into reality. As Dexter tries to retire from the code, Saxon targets Deb, shatters the illusion of a clean exit, and forces Dexter into choices Harry never prepared him for. The tragedy is that Dexter believes love has finally made him safe to others, when in truth it has never made him more dangerous, and the next decision he makes in Deb's hospital room will prove it. Dexter walks into that hospital room believing love has finally tamed his dark passenger. Oliver Saxon walks in as the reminder that the code has never been more fragile. Let's kick things off with who Saxon really is. On the surface, he is a mild-mannered surgeon. Beneath that, he is Daniel Vogel, the estranged son of Dr. Evelyn Vogel, the very architect who helped Harry design the code. Throughout his life, Saxon has been a pure, unfiltered version of what Harry feared Dexter could become, a sadistic serial killer who murders with empathy. The code almost feels written for him. He also checks every other box. Saxon is actively dangerous in the present, not just a historical killer. He is hunting Deb, threatening Harrison, circling Hannah. He penetrates Dexter's home, manipulates the police, and turns the manhunt into a personal game. This is not some marginal offender Dexter discovers in a file. This is a predator embedded directly into Dexter's life, escalating with every encounter. By the time Deb is shot and left in critical condition, Saxon is not just a code target. He is the embodiment of what the code claims to exist for. So Dexter responds the way the series has trained us to expect. He stalks Saxon, tracks his movements, studies his patterns. We see the familiar ritual take shape: surveillance, plastic, a remote location, the tools laid out with clinical precision. Visually and structurally, it plays like a deliberate return to form, as if the show is telling us we're going to dive deep back into classic kill room logic after seasons of emotional chaos and compromised choices. But then comes the break. Dexter captures Saxon and has every opportunity to kill him cleanly under the code. Instead, he cuts him loose from the table, calls in the arrest, and decides to let the legal system handle the man who just destroyed Deb's future. His stated reason is simple. He wants to leave with Hannah and Harrison, to abandon killing and start a new life. The code is no longer his guiding law, it is an obstacle to the fantasy of escape. This is the pattern interrupt. For the first time, Dexter refuses to kill a perfect code-approved target. If the code once demanded that he finish what Harry started, what does it mean that he now outsources justice to the same system Harry rejected? The long-term effects of this choice will be catastrophic, and the next time Dexter faces Saxon, the code will be gone entirely. That moral handoff to the police feels, in the moment, like growth. But in Dexter's world, half measures against a predator are just delayed executions, and Oliver Saxon is about to prove it in the most devastating way possible. Let's kick things off with the chain of events. After Dexter exposes Saxon as Vogel's killer, he makes that unprecedented choice to walk away from the kill table and let the justice system handle it. Saxon is arrested, booked, processed. On paper, the code has been honored, a guilty man is in custody, the dark passenger is restrained, and Dexter appears to have chosen life over death. Yet the very institution Harry rejected is now responsible for containing a man who has already outplayed multiple detectives. When Saxon escapes transport, the show doesn't linger on elaborate planning. That's the point. A small procedural failure is all it takes. A loose restraint, a distracted officer, a momentary lapse, and suddenly, the man Dexter refused to kill is back on the street. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated the code as armor against chaos. Here, the armor is off. The system Harry distrusted becomes the weak link, and Saxon moves straight toward Dexter's real vulnerability, Deb. The shooting itself is quick, brutal, and deeply personal. Debra, now a detective again and trying to rebuild her shattered life, confronts Saxon in a hallway. There is no grand standoff, no heroic duel, just an abrupt burst of violence that leaves Deb on the ground, bleeding as Saxon flees. An event that changed everything plays out in seconds. The man Dexter let live puts a bullet in the person who has sacrificed the most to protect his truth. This is where we're going to dive deep into the code's original, ruthless logic. Harry designed it to kill killers before they could create more victims. Under that framework, Saxon on the table was not a dilemma, he was the exact scenario the code existed to solve. If Dexter had followed, this would be the start of Dexter's final unmasking to himself. As Deb's condition worsens, the fantasy that the code can coexist with normal life collapses. His response to her fate will not be a careful application of rules, but a raw, unfiltered assertion of control over death itself. breaking any remaining pretense that he respects systems, boundaries, or even the basic value of a human life. Deb's collapse in the hospital is the emotional point of no return. The very next move Dexter makes turns that private breaking point into a public execution, captured on camera, and it exposes that Harry's code is no longer a rulebook, just a story Dexter tells himself. Let's kick things off with the setting. Dexter walks down the hospital corridor toward Oliver Saxon, handcuffed to a bed, officially in police custody, with visible security cameras covering every angle. This is not a kill room, not an abandoned building, not one of the carefully controlled spaces Dexter spent a lifetime constructing. It is the heart of the system Harry told him never to challenge directly. Throughout his life, Dexter has insisted the code is about never getting caught. Here, he steps into a monitored environment on purpose. Then comes the calculated provocation. Dexter sits, almost calm, and places a pen on the tray within Saxon's reach. He slides it toward him, waits in silence, and invites the attack without saying a word. Saxon lunges, drives the pen toward Dexter, and in one fluid motion Dexter redirects it, stabbing Saxon repeatedly in the neck. Blood sprays, Saxon gurgles and dies, and the whole sequence reads as self-defense on video. On paper, it looks like an officer of the law protecting himself. In reality, every step was premeditated to guarantee that Saxon would die here, not in court. This single act violates multiple pillars of the code at once. It is public, in a functioning hospital, with witnesses nearby and cameras rolling. It abandons the ritual that once defined his kills. No plastic, no careful preparation, no trophies, no methodical confirmation of guilt beyond what the police already discovered. It even risks the most basic rule Harry drilled into him: never draw attention, never tempt the system to look directly at Dexter Morgan. The dark passenger no longer waits for a safe outlet, it simply takes control in broad daylight. Dexter's emotional state explains the collapse. He is consumed by rage and grief over what Saxon did to Deb, and the code's structure can no longer contain that pain. This is not the detached analyst of blood patterns. This is a brother lashing out, prioritizing revenge over any strategic concern about consequences. The choice to bait Saxon, rather than let due process proceed, reveals that Dexter has stopped believing in his own narrative about only killing to serve a higher purpose. In that sense, the hallway murder becomes an event that changed how the series frames Dexter's entire life. The show stops pretending he is fundamentally different from the killers he hunts. Harry's rules are no longer a boundary, they are a memory he occasionally references while ignoring their content. And yet, this public execution is not Dexter's final betrayal of any system that might restrain him, because his next move will target something even more sacred than the code itself. Dexter's public execution of Saxon feels like a point of no return, but the most devastating betrayal of any moral boundary happens in near silence, under fluorescent hospital lights. The next person Dexter kills is not a murderer, not a target, and not an enemy. It is Deborah Morgan. Let's kick things off with the brutal reality of that hospital room. After Deb is shot and suffers a massive stroke, doctors explain that she will never recover meaningful brain function. She is kept alive by machines, her body technically functioning, but the Deborah whose rage, love, and foul-mouthed loyalty anchored Dexter's life is gone. When Dexter walks into that room, he does not meet a future victim. He meets the tool in a ritual he knows by heart. On the surface, Dexter frames this as mercy. Deb would not want to live like this. She was a cop, a fighter, someone who defined herself through action and agency. The show leans into that logic, inviting the audience to see this as a tragic kindness. But we're going to dive deep into the darker layer beneath that explanation. Because this would be the start of Dexter using the emotional language of love to justify an act that perfectly serves his own psychological needs. Deb, alive but unresponsive, is a permanent witness to his failures. She is living proof that bringing her into his world, violating the spirit of the code to protect himself, destroyed the person he loved most. By killing her, Dexter is not only sparing her imagined suffering, he is erasing a mirror he cannot bear to face. The line between mercy and self-protection blurs until it is almost indistinguishable. And crucially, this act does not fit any version of Harry's rules. Deb is innocent. She has killed, but in the line of duty, not as one of Dexter's carefully selected victims. There is no investigation, no ritual, no proof gathering, just the raw belief that Dexter's judgment about life and death is enough. This is Harry's original fear made real, that training Dexter to kill within a framework would eventually teach him that he alone can decide who lives and dies in every context. That fear doesn't end with the button on a ventilator, because after Dexter kills Deb, he still has one more choice to make about what her body and his own will mean to the world. So Dexter makes one last medical decision, unplugs Deb, and turns a hospital tragedy into an execution. But the show does not end with that act. Instead, it gives Dexter a final theatrical ritual, a storm, a boat, and a disappearance that looks less like escape and more like a sentence. Let's kick things off with the imagery. Dexter takes Deb's body from the hospital, wrapped and still, and places her gently on the slice of life. He drives straight into an approaching hurricane, ignoring evacuation orders, ignoring the code's demand to avoid unnecessary risk. The Bay Harbor butcher, the meticulous planner, now sails into chaos with a corpse he chose to create. When Dexter steers into that wall of wind and rain, he frames it as a final kill, the destruction of himself. Throughout his life, the boat has been the site of controlled violence. Plastic, tools, a table, and a clear line between guilty and innocent victims. Here, the lines collapse. There is no kill room, no preparation, no trophies. Just Dexter, Deb's body, and the storm. On the surface, it plays as suicide, an event that changed every assumption about how his story might end. The hurricane becomes the ultimate cover-up, swallowing both the evidence and the killer. Then the reversal. The next time Dexter is seen, he is not dead. He is alive in the Pacific Northwest, working as a lumberjack, living in a tiny, bare space, cut off from everyone he once cared about. No Harrison, no Hannah, no Miami Metro, no Harry's ghost. The man who built his entire life on blending in now chooses a life where there is no one to blend in with. This exile functions as self-imposed punishment. Dexter has discovered that his existence destroys people. Harry, Rita, Leela's victims, Dokes, Lagerta, and finally Deb. The long-term effects of his choices form a pattern he can no longer deny. By isolating himself, he is acknowledging, in action if not in words, that proximity to him is lethal. He treats loneliness, monotony, and emotional deprivation as the only sentence harsh enough to match his crimes. At the same time, this is a profound rejection of the code. Harry's rules were built to contain the dark passenger and protect a double life. Deep into how New Blood revisits that question and forces Dexter to confront it all over again. Dexter's exile only makes sense if the code of Harry ever truly meant anything. So in this section, we're going to dive deep into the core rules themselves and watch, one by one, how every pillar cracks under pressure. Let's kick things off with the first commandment: don't get caught. On paper, this is the one Dexter honors most consistently, the rule that shapes every ritual, every plastic sheet, every blood slide. But the longer the series goes on, the more don't get caught mutates into nothing is off limits if it protects Dexter. Framing Dokes as the Bay Harbor butcher, planting the blood slides in his car, and letting Lila finish the job in the cabin turns an innocent colleague into collateral damage. Killing Lagerta in Season 7 is the clearest violation. An honest cop who has discovered the truth is executed in a shipping container. Not because she fits the code, but because prison would mean the end of Dexter's life as a free killer. The second pillar is supposed to be the moral spine. Only kill those who deserve it. Throughout his life, Dexter repeats that line as a mantra, a way to separate himself from the monsters he hunts. Yet the series keeps presenting choices that expose how conditional that promise really is. Sparing Hannah McKay, a serial poisoner with a long trail of victims, is the most blatant emotional override. Harry's code says she qualifies, Dexter's attachment says she doesn't. The pattern becomes even darker with Deb. When Dexter kills Deborah in the hospital, it is framed as a mercy killing, but her condition is the direct consequence of his world. The code that once demanded he protect Deb at all costs now becomes the justification for ending her life. Then there is the proof rule. Gather absolute evidence before a kill. Early on, Dexter stalks, tests, and investigates until there is no doubt. This would be the start of the show's illusion that the code is precise justice. But over time, that precision erodes. Rushed kills, like the motel room murder of the suspected cop killer in Season 2, or emotionally fueled decisions around Miguel Prado and Travis Marshall, show a man increasingly driven by anger, fear, and convenience. By the time he executes Oliver Saxon in police custody, there is no investigation at all, just a camera turned off and a knife to the carotid. The last pillar, blend in with normal life, begins as camouflage. Rita, the kids, barbecues, and the lab job are there to hide the dark passenger. An event that changed the entire equation is that the disguise slowly becomes genuine attachment. Dexter starts to care about Rita, Deb, Harrison, even colleagues like Batista. The long-term effects of that shift are catastrophic. Every real bond creates a new vulnerability the code cannot manage. Protecting the cover now means betraying the people that cover was built around. By the end of the series, no pillar remains intact. Whenever a rule collides with Dexter's immediate desires, keep killing, keep Hannah, keep Harrison, he bends it, then breaks it. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how New Blood exposes this hypocrisy and asks whether any version of the code can survive outside Miami. If the code is already collapsing by the end, that raises a harder question. Did Dexter ever truly live by it, or was it always a carefully edited story he told himself to survive? Let's kick things off with Season 1, because this is where the illusion is strongest. On the surface, Dexter tracks down clear killers, gathers proof, and follows Harry's voice like scripture. Yet even here, cracks appear. He toys with the security guard at the shipping yard, weaponizing the ice truck killer rather than applying the code directly. He kills Brian not because Brian fails Harry's test, but because Brian threatens Deb, and by extension, Dexter's cover. The verdict for Season 1 is a high adherence score in practice to keep believing in the code. Season 2's score drops sharply because every kill is now entangled with self-protection. Season 3 is an event that changed how the code functions. Miguel Prado is Dexter's first real apprentice, and training him means explaining the rules out loud. That should clarify the code. Instead, it exposes how vague it is. Dexter bends criteria to justify killing Ellen Wolf for Miguel, then kills Miguel himself when the partnership endangers him. Season 3 becomes the start of using the code to manage relationships, not just victims. By Season 4 and 5, emotional exceptions dominate. Rita and the kids, then Lumen, reframe Dexter's life as a search for connection. He kills Trinity on a timetable driven by family fear, not investigative certainty. He lets Lumen go, fully aware she is killed outside Harry's structure, because her healing matters more than consistency. The adherence score here is mixed at best, the ritual remains, but love and guilt decide who qualifies. From Season 6 through 8, we're going to dive deep into a code that has become almost pure rhetoric. Brothers Sam, Travis Marshall, Hannah, Deb, LaGuerta, Oliver Saxon, each arc shows Dexter making choices driven by love, fear, or desperation, then retrofitting Harry's words afterward. Killing Travis in front of Deb, protecting Hannah despite knowing her victims, and executing Saxon in custody prove that never get caught and only kill the guilty now mean do whatever feels necessary in the moment. So which season represents Dexter's closest attempt at Harry's intended rules? Early, when the illusion is clean, or later, when the hypocrisy is fully discovered? In the next section, New Blood will push that question to its final, brutal answer. So when New Blood asks whether Dexter has ever truly followed Harry's rules, it forces a harder question in the background. What did Harry actually want this code to be, and what did Dexter quietly turn it into throughout his life? Let's kick things off with Harry's likely goals, because those early intentions are crucial. Harry is a cop who has completely lost faith in the system, but he has not lost all of his morality. The code, as Harry designs it, is damage control. Protect innocent people from Dexter's urges. Keep Dexter from being caught so he is not executed or locked away. And, underneath all the rhetoric about channeling the dark passenger, there is a clear attempt to minimize how many people Dexter kills at all. Harry's rules reflect that anxiety. Gather absolute proof. Only kill those who demonstrably deserve it. Never harm innocents. Blend in, keep the circle small, avoid escalation. This would be the start of a grim, practical protocol. If the monster cannot be cured, then it must at least be contained. The code is not meant to make Dexter feel noble. It is meant to keep the body count and the collateral damage as low as possible. Over time, Dexter quietly rewrites that mission. The same rules that were supposed to limit his kills become a blanket justification for eliminating anyone who threatens his comfort or secrets. Brian is the first major example. Dexter does not kill Brian because Brian violates the code. Brian targets Deb, threatens Dexter's cover, and offers a life in which the dark passenger is totally unleashed. Dexter's choice is framed as heroic, but it is also self-preservation disguised as sacrifice. By the time James Dokes closes in, the shift is unmistakable. Dexter plants the blood slides, lets Leela's fire do the final work, and then accepts Dokes' death as a necessary consequence of protecting the code. Harry's original spirit, never harm innocents, has been hollowed out. Dokes is not a killer who fits the ritual. He is an obstacle. The same pattern repeats with Lagerta. When she discovers the truth about the Bay Harbor butcher, Dexter does not walk away or accept exposure. He brings her to the shipping container and lets Deb pull the trigger, turning the never-get-caught warnings about isolation, restraint, and the emotional cost to those around him. The long-term effects of that selective recall are brutal: Deb's breakdown, Lagerta's execution, Saxon's murder in custody, all justified under a code that was supposed to prevent exactly those outcomes. By the end, there are effectively two codes operating in parallel. Harry's code is a desperate damage control protocol built to contain a killer. Dexter's code is a myth he tells himself to live with being one. In the next section, New Blood will force those two versions into direct conflict and show which one actually governs his final choice. That split between Harry's damage control protocol and Dexter's self-serving myth leads directly into the central question of the entire series. Is Dexter a vigilante or just another killer with good branding? Let's kick things off with the most generous reading. On the surface, Dexter looks like a dark answer to a broken system. Throughout his life, he targets dangerous criminals who escape justice on technicalities or lack of evidence. Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, is carving bodies across Miami. Travis Marshall is preparing an apocalyptic tableau of victims. Oliver Saxon is slaughtering people connected to Vogel. In each case, Dexter steps in where law and procedure fail, gathers what he calls absolute proof, and eliminates the threat. From this angle, the code appears to weaponize his urges in a way that prevents future harm. But the show keeps asking whether that is really what drives him. The supposed vigilante mission is constantly undercut by how quickly Dexter will sacrifice innocents, or at least non-targets, the moment his safety is at stake. James Dokes is the clearest example. Dokes is a relentless cop, not a killer. Dexter kidnaps him, imprisons him in the Everglades, and frames him as the Bay Harbor butcher with planted blood slides. Leela strikes the match that kills Dokes, but Dexter created the prison and the narrative that made his death possible. The code's spirit, never harm the innocent, is already dead there. The same pattern escalates with Lagerta. She follows the evidence, discovers the truth behind the Bay Harbor butcher, and confronts Dexter and Deb in the shipping container. By the rules Harry laid out, Lagerta is not a valid target. She is a cop doing her job. Yet Dexter is ready to kill her to protect his double life, and Deb ultimately pulls the trigger. This would be the start of a final stretch where the code loses every time it collides with Dexter's need to survive. Deb herself becomes the most devastating case study. When she discovers Dexter's kill room with Travis Marshall on the table, the vigilante fantasy shatters. Deb is forced into complicity, then into covering up Lagerda's murder, and the long-term effects of those choices destroy her career, her mental health, and eventually her life. Dexter's code does not shield her, it consumes her. Hannah McKay exposes a different fracture. She is a serial poisoner who clearly meets Dexter's usual criteria, yet attraction overrides principle. Dexter lets her live, then actively helps her escape, proving that when emotion clashes with the code, emotion wins. Across Rita, Deb, Dokes, LaGuerta, and Hannah, the series keeps showing collateral damage that a true vigilante ethic would try to minimize. The dark passenger is always central. The victims on his table are often secondary. By the end, when Dexter kills Oliver Saxon in police custody, even the thin pretense of due process is gone. So the question the show leaves hanging is simple and brutal. Did the code ever make Dexter better than the killers he hunted? Or just more organized, more selective, and far more capable of telling himself a comforting story? In the next section, New Blood will push that question into Dexter's final relationships and force the answer into the open. If the code is just a comforting story, then what is Dexter really? Let's kick things off with the comparison to addiction narratives. Dexter has rules: only kill killers, gather proof, never get caught, blend into normal life. Addicts have rules too: only on weekends, never at work, never around family. Under stress, those rules almost always collapse. When Rita is threatened, when Deborah is in danger, when his identity is close to being discovered, Dexter's dark passenger pushes past the code in the same way withdrawal or craving pushes past an addict's promises. We see this most clearly when the dark passenger overrides his supposed discipline. In Season 2, trapped by Dokes at the cabin, Dexter doesn't carefully apply the code. Leela blows the place up, and Dexter lets an innocent man take the rap as the Bay Harbor butcher. In Season 5, his rage over Rita's death explodes into the impulsive kill of Boyd Fowler in a blinding outburst, long before he has a full ritual or investigation. Even earlier, the security guard in Season 1 is maneuvered toward death without the absolute certainty Harry demanded. These are not controlled executions, they are relapses. Pattern interrupt: the code is supposed to be the leash, but over time it becomes the excuse. Dexter tells Lumen, Hannah, and later, Harrison, that the code is what keeps him from becoming a monster. Yet the audience has already watched him break it whenever his emotional needs spike. The long-term effects of this are devastating. Each breach teaches the dark passenger that the script is flexible, that the rules can bend whenever Dexter feels cornered or alone. At the same time, the code gives Dexter a powerful illusion of control. It is a script he can hide behind when his kills turn more chaotic. When he murders Oliver Saxon in police custody, on camera he frames it as mercy and justice, not as a total abandonment of due process and even the basic don't get caught rule. The code lets him narrate every relapse as a justified exception. Taken together, the series argues that no set of rules can fully contain a compulsion this strong without catastrophic leaks. Harry's design was always reactive, not curative. In New Blood, when Harrison confronts Dexter, that dark passenger finally meets someone who refuses to believe in the code's myth, and in the next section, that refusal will force Dexter to face the consequences he has dodged for an entire life. If Harry's design was always reactive, not curative, then the real indictment of the code is written in the bodies that fall around Dexter, not beneath his knife. Throughout his life, every time Dexter bends or betrays those rules, the universe of the show responds the same way. Innocent people bleed for his compromises. Let's kick things off with Brian, because that decision is the template. Dexter kills his own brother to protect Deb and preserve the illusion of a normal life. On paper, it aligns with the code. Brian is a killer, Deb is a potential victim, the choice is clear. But the long-term effects of that choice are brutal. Deb's trauma from being strapped to that table, nearly murdered by the man she was falling for, never really heals. Brian's body disappears, but the psychological crater in Deb remains, pushing her into therapy, into self-doubt, and eventually into a twisted dependence on Dexter's protection. Season 2 maps the next chain reaction. Dexter doesn't kill Dokes, but he frames him, plants the blood slides, and allows Leela to finish the job in that cabin explosion. Dokes' death is an event that changed the moral weather of the series. An innocent cop, the only one who truly discovered Dexter's truth without illusion, dies screaming while Dexter walks away. Lila's love becomes weaponized by the lie Dexter built. Her explosion is not random chaos, it is the direct combustion of a code violation, where never get caught quietly over rules don't harm the innocent. LaGuerta's murder is where that pattern turns fully tragic. Emotional exceptions keep multiplying the casualties. Sparing Hannah McKay because Dexter feels seen by her unleashes a wave of near deaths and legal chaos. Deb crashing her car after being drugged. Sal Price dying when he gets too close to the truth. Law enforcement resources warped around protecting Dexter's dark passenger instead of actual victims. Every time Hannah is allowed to slip away, the code looks less like a system and more like a self-serving fantasy. The same happens with Oliver Saxon. Dexter initially spares him in the hospital, planning to let the system work. That hesitation leads directly to Saxon shooting Deb in the precinct parking lot. The code's delay, its attempt at a cleaner solution, becomes the bullet that destroys Dexter's anchor. Across these arcs, the show punishes Dexter's violations not by killing him, but by annihilating the lives orbiting him. The fantasy that his method is controlled or victimless collapses under the weight of Brian, Dokes, LaGuerta, Deb, and everyone twisted by Hannah and Saxon. In the end, the true measure of Harry's code is not how many killers Dexter stops, but how many innocents die or break when he decides the rules no longer apply. In the next section, we'll trace how each person who discovers Dexter becomes another test case in that deadly equation, and whether anyone ever truly escapes its consequences. If Harry's code is the moral spine of Dexter's life, the series keeps snapping that spine on purpose. The writers present a clean rulebook for a killer, then spend 8 seasons proving how fragile, selfish, and dangerous that rulebook really is. Let's kick things off with the hook. The code makes a serial killer feel safe to root for. At the start, Dexter only kills killers, gathers absolute proof, and never harms the innocent. Throughout his life, this mantra turns his dark passenger into something almost noble. Viewers are invited into a controlled fantasy. What if someone like Dexter cleaned up the monsters the system misses? But from early on, the show quietly undercuts that comfort. Dexter kills Brian not because Brian fails the code, but because Brian threatens Deb and Dexter's cover. In Season 2, framing Dokes as the Bay Harbor Butcher keeps Dexter out of prison while destroying an innocent man's name. Even when Dexter does not directly kill Dokes, the planted blood slides and calculated lies betray the supposed do-no-harm to innocent spirit. This would be the start of a pattern where the code bends every time Dexter's survival is at stake. The writers then escalate by tying major tragedies to those bends. Rita's murder lands right after Dexter lets Trinity live longer than the code allows, fascinated by Trinity's double life and father persona. Deb's breakdowns intensify each time Dexter stretches the rules for Lumen, for Hannah, for personal attachment rather than justice. By the finale, killing Oliver Saxon in police custody is an event that changed the meaning of the code entirely. It is no longer about proof or due process. It is about Dexter deciding his judgment outranks the law in broad daylight. Crucially, characters inside the narrative keep calling out the hypocrisy. LaGuerta refuses to accept the convenient story about Dokes and hunts the truth about Dexter's victims. Deb, once shielded by Harry, is forced to witness the gap between Dexter's rhetoric and his actions, hiding bodies, manipulating cases, choosing murder over confession again and again. Their confrontations function as the audience's conscience, spoken aloud. Here's the pattern interrupt. The code is not just Harry's legacy, it becomes a mirror for the viewers. The tension between the stated rules and Dexter's actual choices keeps the series gripping. Viewers end up rooting for him to escape, even when that escape requires destroying people who discovered the truth. Every broken rule carries visible consequences: dead spouses, ruined careers, shattered case by case, until what began as a desperate containment strategy ends as Dexter's self-serving story about himself. Let's kick things off with that original thesis. Harry, facing a child with unstoppable urges to kill and a justice system he no longer trusted, invents a framework: only kill the guilty, gather proof, never get caught, blend in. Throughout his life, Dexter clings to that structure as both leash and identity. He is not just a murderer, he is Harry's student, a dark passenger with a purpose. But every major violation we've tracked exposes how fragile that purpose really is. Dokes is the first major rupture. By planting blood slides, manipulating evidence, and allowing Lila's explosion to seal Dokes' fate, Dexter doesn't technically kill him, but he destroys an innocent man to protect himself. The spirit of the code, never harm those who don't deserve it, dies in that Everglades cabin. With LaGuerta, the breach is even clearer. She discovers the truth about the Bay Harbor butcher, follows the evidence, and ends up on Dexter's kill table. Her crime is knowing too much. The code's target has shifted from monsters to witnesses. Then, the emotional exceptions start to dominate. Hannah McKay is a serial poisoner who absolutely meets the code's criteria. Dexter proves she killed, confronts her, and then lets her live because he's in love. This would be the start of a pattern where feeling overrides rule. By the time Oliver Saxon murders Deb and Dexter walks into that hospital room, the code's requirement for due process or certainty has no meaning. Saxon is restrained, in custody, and already caught. Dexter kills him on camera anyway, as an act of pure rage and grief, then calls it self-defense. Deb's death is the most devastating contradiction. The man raised to protect his sister above all else unplugs her, becoming the direct cause of the person Harry most wanted the code to save. In that moment, the framework that once separated victims from targets collapses inward. Everyone close becomes collateral, including the one person who loved Dexter after she discovered the truth. By the finale, what remains of the code is almost spectral. A ghost of Harry's voice, a set of rituals, the plastic, the slides, the careful stalking that no longer constrain Dexter's choices. The long-term effects of living inside that myth are written on every body it leaves behind. Which brings the analysis back to Saxon's death in the opening image. That quick, calculated throat cut in a police station is not an outlier. It is the endpoint of a long, methodical erosion, where each compromise, Dokes, LaGuerta, Hannah, Deb, sandpapers away another layer of integrity until the code is revealed as what it always was, a story Dexter told to make his killings bearable. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how the people who discovered that truth became the final evidence against the code itself. If Harry's code was supposed to be a shield for the innocent, why do so many of Dexter's most devastating kills circle back to one core priority: Dexter Morgan staying safe? Throughout his life, the public story is that he lives by Harry's rules. Underneath, the pattern is far simpler. Protect yourself, protect the few people you love, and feed the dark passenger whenever circumstances allow. Let's kick things off with Brian, because this would be the start of that hidden code revealing itself. When Dexter kills his brother, Brian hasn't violated Harry's commandments. Brian targets Deb, not because she is guilty, but because she is the obstacle keeping Dexter from embracing his true nature. Dexter's choice in that moment is not between good and evil, it is between two attachments. He kills Brian to preserve Deb, his life as a blood spatter analyst, and the fragile narrative Harry built. The victim is family, sacrificed on the altar of Dexter's double existence. The same structure repeats with Dokes, is strong but not absolute. The code should demand restraint, proof, another way. Instead, Dexter stages the scene and kills LaGuerta to save himself and Deb from prison. An event that changed the moral landscape of the series plays out not as righteous execution, but as premeditated murder of a colleague whose only crime was pursuing justice too effectively. Hannah exposes the flip side of this pattern. She is a serial poisoner who absolutely fits the profile of Dexter's usual victims. Yet he spares her, then actively protects her, because he is in love. The dark passenger is fed selectively now, overridden whenever attachment or desire gets in the way. With Deb and Saxon, the contradictions peak. Dexter kills Saxon in police custody, abandoning even the appearance of due process. Then later, kills Deb on life support, framing it as mercy while erasing the living witness who knew him completely. Taken together, these choices reveal a real code that is far more human and messy than the clean vigilante fantasy. It is not about justice. It is about ordinary selfishness, fear, and attachment dressed up in ritual and language about deserving victims. That raises the central question. Does this make Dexter more tragic, because he genuinely tried to be better and failed, or more monstrous, because he hid behind a fake morality while always putting himself first? In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how each person who uncovered that truth forces the audience to confront the discomfort of caring about a character whose rules were always more about him than about right and wrong. That discomfort is where this whole breakdown really lives, because now it is time to turn the question outward. Throughout his life, Dexter clung to Harry's code as the one stable rulebook in a chaotic inner world. But every major turning point in the series asks the same question. When did that rulebook actually fall apart? So let's kick things off with the moment that feels, to each viewer, like the first true abandonment of the code. For some, it might be Brian, where Dexter kills his own brother not because Brian violates the rules, but because Brian threatens Dexter's cover through Deb. For others, the line is crossed with Dokes, when Dexter plants the blood slides and lets an innocent man die under the label of Bay Harbor Butcher. Still others might point to LaGuerta, or to Oliver Saxon, or to a smaller, quieter decision that never leaves their mind. The question is simple. Which moment is the first time Dexter is no longer living by Harry's rules at all? As a mental poll, it helps to think in terms of the most unforgivable violation. Framing Dokes as a serial killer, even if Dexter does not physically kill him, turns the do not harm the innocent spirit of the code into collateral damage. Killing LaGuerta in that shipping container is an event that changed the entire moral landscape of the series, because she is a cop whose greatest crime is discovering the truth. Sparing Hannah, a serial poisoner, just because she understands his dark passenger, inverts the premise that guilty victims must die and innocent people must be protected. Killing Deb in the hospital, mercy or not, is Dexter deciding that his own pain and control matter more than any rule Harry ever imagined. There is another, deeper layer that this raises as well. Was there ever a real moral code, or was Harry's system always a coping story that Dexter and the audience agreed to believe in together? Harry's original pillars, never get caught, only kill those who deserve it, gather absolute proof, blend into normal life, sound clean. But from the early security guard in Season 1, to professional manipulation of evidence, to executions like Saxon in police custody, the long-term effects of following those rules look less like justice and more like sophisticated self-preservation. That is why this video is not just about plot recap, but about how narratives of control and righteousness wrap themselves around violence.